In this video, we will show you how to replace your master cylinder on this Honda Accord. This will be located along the driver's side of your engine compartment. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we need to do is make sure we're in a safe area because we're going to have to raise and support the vehicle so we can remove each of the wheels to bleed the braking system. Before we start doing that and taking anything apart, quickly inspect your brand new master cylinder. Compare it to the old one. Assuming it looks exactly the same, you're going to have to bench bleed the brand new master cylinder so you remove any air from in the system. Now with that said, you're going to want to have a couple handy adapters that will screw directly into here and make their way up and into the reservoir. We want them to come down and in just a little bit. Let's get over to the bench and we'll talk about this more. Now over on the bench with a vise, we're going to continue on with our bench bleeding. The first thing we'll do is open up our cap here, a quick inspection, and we'll set that aside. Now the next thing we need to do is make our way inside of each one of these ports. We'll be using a threaded fitting and then also some brake line, curving, making its way up and into the brake master cylinder. This one here. Make sure these go in by hand. There's one. We'll snug that one up in a second. Continue on to the second one. Once again, bringing it into the master cylinder, down into the proper position. We'll just flex this down into the master cylinder as I mentioned. We want to make sure that will be underneath the fluid level. Now that they're started in, let's snug them up. Now it's time to fill up the master cylinder reservoir with brand new brake fluid. When you fill up the system, you want to make sure you're either using .3 or .4 brake fluid. Never use .5. Looking at the side of the master cylinder here, I can see a maximum line. Some nice brand new fluid in there. With this topped off to the maximum and our bleeder lines making its way all the way up into the reservoir and down inside of the fluid, we'll continue on with a brass punch. We're going to carefully depress this piston into the master cylinder. When you start pressing this, what you'll find is it will push fluid and air up through these lines and you're going to see air bubbles inside the reservoir. We'll repeat this process slowly, continually topping it off as needed. At this point, we've repeated the process several times. I don't see any air bubbles coming out. At this point, we'll cause some vibration real quick. This should help break free any small air bubbles. A couple more pumps, we'll double check to make sure we don't see any large air bubbles. This looks perfect. Now let's continue on to removing our bleeding tubes here. We'll make sure we have a collection receptacle under this area to try to catch as much of that brake fluid as possible. Now before that runs out, you'll find that with your kit, it came with some brand new plugs here. We'll just take each of those and screw them in by hand. You will want to make sure they're snug. Keep in mind they are only plastic. Just make sure that's not leaking. Same for the other one. Now we can install our cover on this temporarily. Let's pause on the master cylinder and make our way over to the vehicle. Now back over at the vehicle, we can start removing the master cylinder. Just a quick note about that is, as I had mentioned before, you will have to bleed the brakes at each wheel, so you want to make sure the bleeder screws open up. Now with that said, let's start by cleaning up the master cylinder where our lines connect into. You can see them right down along the passenger side of that master cylinder closest to the engine. We'll just use some parts cleaner for this. Of course, I do have a collection bucket under this area to collect anything that might happen to make its way towards the ground. Now that we have that area cleaned, the next thing we'll do is remove as much fluid from inside of the master cylinder reservoir as possible. Set this aside. We use our fluid extraction pump here. Just get that back on there temporarily, make our way back down to the lines. Now we can start removing each of our two lines. When you remove these, keep in mind there could still be fluid inside this area. Have your collection bucket under there. Use a 10 millimeter on each of these. There's one. Let's get that second line. There we are. There's our second one. Looking at the master cylinder reservoir cap, you'll find that it does have two wires making their way off of it. We're going to disconnect those. Take hold of each end here, gently separate it. A quick inspection for corrosion and you can set those aside. This one's got a little corrosion. We'll use some sandpaper on that if necessary. Let's get our sandpaper in there. That looks better. If you find it looks like it's damaged, just go ahead and replace that. These look fine. If you find you have a hard time making your way down inside this area, you can remove these two hoses. Before you remove them, go ahead and mark one of them. We want to make sure it goes back in its original position here. We don't want to switch them up. Just pull that right out of place, give it a quick squeeze, make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged. We'll set those aside. Now we can dismount the master cylinder from the brake booster. Looking at this, you're going to find that you have two 8 millimeter headed mounting nuts. One over on the passenger side here towards the engine, one over on the driver's side. The one on the driver's side is a little harder to see. It's pretty much up against this area. Inspect your mounting hardware as you remove it, replace it as necessary. We've got the nut off of there. Have a quick look. You might have a locking washer as well. Now let's make our way over to the other side here. To make it a little easier to gain access to that mounting nut, you can remove the vacuum hose that leads to your brake booster. This has a small clamp that you can squeeze, and then you should be able to pull the hose right off of there. Use some pliers for this. Once again, a quick squeeze, make sure it's soft and pliable. This one looks fine. Now we can gain access to that final mounting nut over there. Get the lock washer off there. Let's take hold of that master cylinder and carefully remove it from the vehicle. Keep in mind there could still be fluid inside of this. You don't want to get it on the paint of your vehicle. right on out of there. There it is, friend. The next thing we need to do is clean and inspect the brake booster where the master cylinder will sit. There's also a seal located inside of this area that we will be replacing. We'll give this a quick wipe and an inspection. Looks like there's some gasket maker on ours. We'll just make sure we clean that up with a nice flat razor blade. With that area cleaned up, let's continue on with an angled pick. We're going to remove this seal so we can install our brand new one. Just gently make our way in and behind this area. You want to be careful not to scratch anything. Another quick wipe in this area. Just give that a nice inspection. Now we can install our brand new seal. You want to make sure you have it in the proper orientation. If you were to look along the center of the seal, you're going to find an area that kind of bulges outward a little bit. And if you were to turn it over, it's inverted. We want to make sure that we have that bulge facing out and towards the engine, not towards the passenger compartment. Go ahead and take this and slide it into place. Press that in all the way around. Now we can prepare to install our brand new master cylinder. We'll start by carefully putting this in place and starting on the mounting hardware, holding this to the brake booster. Get this properly aligned. We can start pressing it in. Now once you have that up against the booster, we'll continue on with our locking washers and our mounting nuts. You want to make sure you start each of these on by hand, and then you can snug them up. After that, torque them to 13 foot-pounds. Got our lock washer and our mounting nut here. Make our way down there. Washer's on. We'll do the same to the other side real quick. Let's get this one on. I'll snug this one. Let's get this other one. Get that one lined up. Now we'll torque these to that 13 foot-pounds as I mentioned. Now it's time to reconnect each of our two brake lines to the master cylinder. We'll start with the one closest to the brake booster. Once again, there is going to be fluid in this area. Make sure you have your collection bucket under here when you do remove that mounting plug. Get that in there. Of course, we will start this in by hand. We do not want to cross thread this into the master cylinder. Use a 10mm to snug it up. Okay, right there is bottomed out. Just make sure that's nice and snug. Okay, right there is bottomed out. We'll clean up our mess and do a quick inspection for leaks. Now let's attach our vacuum hoses across the top here. We'll make sure we have them in the proper orientation. We do have that marking. Double check to make sure they're both secured in place. Now it's time for our level sensor wiring. You can't mix them up. Just get this aligned, press it in. Heard a nice click. We'll give it a tug, make sure it's secured. Same for the other one. There we are. Let's get our vacuum hose located onto that brake booster. Press it on there as far as possible. We'll continue on with the clamp, squeeze it, slide it back into its original position. Take hold of the hose, give it a tug, make sure it's secured properly to the brake booster. Now that we have everything secure up along the front inside the engine compartment, it's time to start bleeding the brakes. When you bleed the brakes, you want to make sure you bleed them in a very specific order. We'll be starting on the passenger side rear. To remove your wheel, you want to make sure you safely raise and support the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done so, you'll continue on to removing all 4 of your 19mm lug nuts, the hubcap, and the wheel. You saw how to remove one wheel. The process is the exact same thing for all others. Now we can start bleeding the brakes starting at the passenger side rear. With the wheel out of the way, if you were to look along the backside where the backing plate is, you're going to find the bleeder screw, which comes out of the backside of your wheel cylinder. It's common to have a rubber boot. This one does not. If it has the boot, go ahead and remove that. The next thing we'll have to do is continue with an 8mm wrench, and it's a good idea to have a collection receptacle because we want to make sure we recycle that fluid properly. We'll have a second person inside of the vehicle. We're going to ask them to pump up the brake pedal. Go ahead and pump the brake pedal, please. Now, while they're holding that, we'll go ahead and open this up, and we're watching for air and fluid to make its way out of this. Let's continue that process. Go ahead and pump, please. Go ahead and pump. At this point, I have no air coming out of the system, but I do want to ensure that I have only clean brake fluid making its way all the way down here. Since the master cylinder is all the way on the far side of the car, we want to repeat this process several times. Go ahead and pump the brake pedal, please. Now we can remove our apparatus. You can release that brake pedal, thank you. Clean up our mouse. If you have a brake bleeder cover, go ahead and install that now. Once you've done that, we're going to move along to going to the left front, the driver's side front wheel. We'll stop at the master cylinder along the way and top it off as necessary with that .3 or .4 brake fluid. Over on the driver's side front here, we'll be using a 10mm for the bleeder screw. Go ahead and pump up the brake pedal, please. Go ahead and pump. Go ahead and pump. One last time here. All right. Now we can close this off. Remove our apparatus and clean our mouse. Let's make our way to the driver's side rear. All right, we're over on the driver's side rear. We'll be back using our 8mm headed wrench on that bleeder screw. We'll get that ready. We have our collection receptacle, of course. All right, we're clear to pump that brake pedal, please. Go ahead and pump. Go ahead and pump. Go ahead and pump. Okay, as you can see, I had only clean fluid making its way through here with no air bubbles. Let's go ahead and clean up our mess here, and we'll make our way to the passenger side front. We stopped at the master cylinder, checked the brake fluid level. Now we'll make our way over here. We can open this up. Go ahead and pump up the brake pedal, please. Go ahead and pump. Go ahead and pump. This is looking good. One last time here. Go ahead and pump, please. Oh, yeah. That looks good. All right, you can release that brake pedal. Can you just pump it up till it's nice and firm, please? Perfect. Thank you very much. Clean your mess. Once again, if you have bleeder screw covers, make sure those are installed. Once you've completed the bleeding sequence and cleaned your mess, go ahead and reinstall your wheels. The process for one is the same for all. Get the wheel on there. Install that hubcap. Make sure that the valve stem port is properly aligned. Continue on with your lug nuts. Now with our hubcap and lug nuts back in place, we'll have the wheel back on the ground and we'll torque these to 80 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Do the same to all wheels. Now back up under the hood, we're going to inspect where the lines go into the master cylinder. Ensure that you do not see a brake fluid leak. Once you've confirmed that looks good, go ahead and top off the master cylinder. Looking at the master cylinder itself, you can see that it does have a maximum line. We'll go ahead and open this up and top it off as necessary with our .3 or .4 brake fluid. Once it is properly topped off, make sure that you reinstall the cap and it's properly secured. Okay friend, we finished the installation of our brake master cylinder. At this point, you want to go ahead and pump up that brake pedal, ensure it's nice and firm. After that, you can go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test and test the functionality. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.